The reflex Quinlan Thorne had learned to make herself small. She walked through the halls of Roosevelt Preparatory Academy with her shoulders slightly hunched, her messenger bag held close to her body like a shield, her eyes fixed on the worn linoleum tiles that stretched endlessly before her. The school was a sprawling brick structure in suburban Pennsylvania, built in the 1970s and renovated just enough to avoid condemnation, but not enough to feel welcoming. Its hallways smelled perpetually of industrial cleaner and cafeteria grease, and its fluorescent lights hummed with a frequency that seemed designed to induce headaches. Quinlan had transferred here 6 weeks ago when her mother accepted a nursing position at the regional hospital, and in those 6 weeks she had perfected the art of invisibility. She ate lunch in the far corner of the library, spent her free periods in the computer lab, and timed her movements between classes to avoid the main crush of students. It wasn't paranoia that drove this careful choreography. It was experience. The first day at Roosevelt, Quinlan had made the mistake of walking with her natural gait, confident, balanced, aware. She had made eye contact. She had stood at her full height, which was modest but not diminutive. Within an hour, she had attracted attention. By lunch, she had attracted the wrong kind of attention. His name was Trent Castellano, and he ruled Roosevelt Preparatory the way a medieval lord ruled a fiefdom, through fear, charisma, and the unshakable belief that he was entitled to dominance. Trent was tall and athletic, with the kind of symmetrical features and effortless confidence that made teachers overlook his cruelty and students excuse it as charisma. He was the quarterback of the football team, the son of a prominent real estate developer whose donations funded the new gymnasium, and the center of a social constellation that determined who mattered at Roosevelt and who didn't. Quinlan had learned within days that she fell firmly into the latter category. The first incident was minor. Trent and his two constant companions, Marcus Webb, a linebacker with a square jaw and dead eyes, and Ashton Pierce, a wiry soccer player with a cruel smile, had been loitering near the water fountain when Quinlan approached. She had barely registered their presence before Trent stepped directly into her path. "Excuse me," she had said quietly, trying to step around him. Trent hadn't moved. Instead, he had looked her up and down with exaggerated slowness, then turned to Marcus and Ashton. "Did you guys hear something? Like a mouse squeaking?" The three of them had laughed, and Quinlan had felt her face burn. She had waited for Trent to move, and when he finally did, it was with a shoulder bump that sent her stumbling sideways. Her water bottle had clattered to the floor, and by the time she picked it up, they were already walking away, their laughter echoing down the hallway. That could have been the end of it. In another school, with another group of bullies, that moment of casual cruelty might have been random, forgotten by the next period. But Trent Castellano was bored. Trent Castellano had recently been benched for the first quarter of the upcoming game due to a declining GPA, and his father had made it clear that disappointing performances would result in losing his car. Trent Castellano needed someone to dominate, and Quinlan Thorne, new, quiet, alone, was perfect. The next day he knocked her binder out of her hands as she walked into English class. Papers scattered across the floor, and Quinlan dropped to her knees to gather them while students stepped around her and Trent's friends snickered from their seats. The day after that, he accidentally kicked her backpack across the hallway. Then he started making comments. "Hey, charity case, nice shirt. Goodwill having a sale? Or, does anyone else smell desperation? Or is it just the new girl?" Each comment drew laughs from his circle and silence from everyone else. Quinlan endured. She had endured worse, though she tried not to think about that. She had made a promise to her grandmother before she died, a promise that had shaped the last 4 years of Quinlan's life. "Violence solves nothing, Misha," her grandmother had whispered from her hospital bed, her hands wrapped around Quinlan's. "I've watched you train, and I'm proud of your discipline, but promise me you'll use that strength only to..." Protect, never to punish. Promise me you won't let anger turn you into someone you're not. Quinlan had promised. She had been 13 then, already holding a brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and training 4 days a week at a gym in their old neighborhood. Her grandmother had worried even then about the darkness Quinlan carried, the rage that simmered beneath her quiet exterior, the result of a childhood marked by her father's abandonment and her mother's subsequent struggles. The training had given Quinlan focus, discipline, and confidence. It had also given her the knowledge that she could hurt people if she wanted to. Her grandmother's death 2 years ago had cemented that promise into something unbreakable. So Quinlan made herself small. She kept her head down. She ignored Trent's comments and his friends' laughter. She reminded herself that this was temporary, that she could endure anything temporary. The problem was that Trent was escalating. By the 3rd week, he had started timing his harassment. He would wait until Quinlan was in the cafeteria line, then cut in front of her, forcing her to wait longer. He would stand in the library doorway during her lunch period, blocking her exit until she asked him to move, then feign surprise and move with exaggerated slowness. He would sit behind her in their shared history class and kick the back of her chair, not hard enough to be obvious, just enough to be constant and maddening. Marcus and Ashton joined in with enthusiasm, turning the harassment into a game. They would throw wadded paper at her when the teacher's back was turned, hide her belongings, and whisper cruel commentary just loud enough for her to hear. The other students noticed. How could they not? Trent wasn't subtle, but noticing and acting were different things, and Roosevelt Preparatory had long ago learned that confronting Trent Castellano was a losing proposition. He was too popular, too connected, too confident in his untouchability. The teachers noticed too. Mrs. Henderson, who taught English, saw Trent knock Quinlan's binder off her desk and did nothing. Mr. Kowalski, who taught history, heard the comments Trent made under his breath and simply asked everyone to focus on the lesson. Principal Davidson was more interested in maintaining Roosevelt's reputation as a top-tier preparatory academy than in addressing what he likely dismissed as typical adolescent social dynamics. So Quinlan was alone in a crowded school, surrounded by witnesses who had chosen blindness. She found refuge in routine. Every morning, she arrived early enough to claim a desk in the back corner of her first period classroom. She ate lunch with a book propped in front of her face, mechanically chewing food she didn't taste. She stayed late in the computer lab, working on assignments that didn't need the extra time, but gave her a reason to avoid the afternoon exodus. At home, she helped her mother with dinner, completed her homework at the kitchen table, and went to bed early. She didn't mention the bullying. Her mother was working double shifts to cover their bills, and Quinlan refused to add to her stress. Besides, what would she say? That she was being harassed but couldn't fight back because of a promise to a dead woman? That she had the skills to end this but was choosing victimhood instead? The 4th week brought a new level of humiliation. Trent orchestrated an incident in the cafeteria during the lunch period when the room was most crowded. Quinlan was carrying her tray, a wilted salad, a carton of milk, an apple, when Trent's foot shot out. She didn't see it in time. Her shin connected with his ankle, and her tray launched forward, the contents spilling across the front of her shirt and onto the floor. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Quinlan stood frozen, milk dripping from her hair, lettuce clinging to her sweater as 200 students and a dozen staff members witnessed her humiliation. Trent's voice rose above the chaos. Wow, she's even clumsier than she looks. More laughter. Someone started recording on their phone. Quinlan dropped to her knees and began gathering the debris with trembling hands, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. A janitor appeared with a mop, his expression sympathetic but tired. Happens all the time, he muttered as if that made it better. That night, Quinlan stood in the shower and let herself cry. She cried for her grandmother, for her loneliness, for the unfairness of keeping a promise that required her to accept abuse. She cried until the water ran cold, then dried off, dressed, and made dinner for her mother. When her mother asked about school, Quinlan smiled and said it was fine. That weekend, she cleaned the apartment, did laundry, grocery shopped, and tried not to think about Monday. But Monday came, as it always did, and with it came more harassment. Trent had apparently enjoyed his cafeteria triumph because he repeated variations of it throughout the week. He would accidentally bump into Quinlan in the hallway, causing her to drop her books. He would knock her pencil off her desk during class. He would stand too close to her at her locker, invading her space until she backed away. Marcus and Ashton provided backup, flanking Trent like enforcers and laughing on cue. By the 5th week, Quinlan's hands had developed a permanent tremor. She startled at unexpected sounds. Her sleep was fragmented and filled with dreams where she fought back. Dreams where her muscle memory took over and she responded to attacks with devastating efficiency. She would wake gasping, disoriented, guilty for the satisfaction she felt in those imaginary victories. During the day, she caught herself slipping into fighting stances when she was alone, her weight balanced, her hands loose, her awareness sharp. She would force herself to relax, to slump, to remember her promise. The effort was exhausting. She was exhausted. The school had become a battlefield where she fought a war of attrition, losing ground daily, but refusing to deploy her weapons. She told herself it was noble. Some days she believed it. Then in the 6th week, something unexpected happened. His name was Silas Ortega, and Quinlan first noticed him in the library during one of her solitary lunch periods. He was shelving books in the non-fiction section, his movements efficient and careful, wearing a staff lanyard that identified him as a student library assistant. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and an intensity in his expression that suggested he was thinking about something far more interesting than the Dewey Decimal System. Quinlan had seen him around school before. He was impossible to miss with his distinctive style that mixed vintage band shirts with expensive sneakers, but they had never spoken. She had categorized him as one of the invisible students like herself, someone who navigated Roosevelt's social hierarchy by avoiding it entirely. She was reading at her usual corner table when a shadow fell across her book. She looked up to find Silas standing there, holding a worn paperback. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I noticed you're reading The Stranger. Have you gotten to the beach scene yet?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant, but his eyes were direct. Quinlan blinked, momentarily thrown by the sudden interaction. "Yes," she managed, "just finished it." Silas smiled, and the expression transformed his face from serious to almost conspiratorial. "Isn't it incredible? The way Camus builds the existential dread through something as simple as heat and light? I wrote my entire junior thesis on that scene." He paused, then seemed to realize he was looming over her. "Mind if I sit? I promise I'm not one of those people who ruins books by over-explaining them." Quinlan hesitated, her instinct to refuse, warring with an unexpected desire for company. "Okay," she said finally, and Silas slid into the chair across from her. They talked for the remaining 20 minutes of lunch period, and Quinlan found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since arriving at Roosevelt. Silas was smart and funny in a self-deprecating way, and he talked about books like they were living things that demanded respect and attention. He didn't ask why she ate lunch in the library, and he didn't mention Trent or the cafeteria incident or any of the 100 small humiliations that had become Quinlan's daily reality. When the bell rang, Silas stood and offered her a genuine smile. "We should do this again. It's rare to find someone who appreciates existentialist literature and doesn't look at me like I'm insufferable." Quinlan smiled back, a real smile that felt strange on her face. "Same time tomorrow?" she suggested. Silas's grin widened. "It's a date. Well, not a date, a literature date. You know what? I'm going to stop talking now. The next day, Silas brought his lunch to the library, and they ate together while discussing Russian literature. The day after that, they argued good-naturedly about whether contemporary young adult fiction had literary merit. By the end of the week, Quinlan found herself looking forward to lunch period in a way she hadn't thought possible. Silas was easy to talk to, and he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He made her laugh. He asked questions that required real answers, and he listened when she spoke. He told her about his family. His parents were both professors at the local university, which explained his vocabulary and his comfort with abstract concepts, and about his plans to study philosophy and literature in college. He didn't pry into her life, but he made it clear that she could share if she wanted to. In the 7th week, Silas invited her to attend a poetry reading at a bookstore downtown. "It's this Saturday," he said, "and I promise it won't be pretentious." Well, it might be slightly pretentious, but in a fun way. Quinlan agreed before she could talk herself out of it. Saturday arrived grey and drizzly, and Quinlan met Silas at the bookstore, a cramped, overstuffed space that smelled of coffee and old paper. The reading was exactly as pretentious as Silas had warned, but they spent most of it exchanging amused glances and trying not to laugh at the most earnest poets. Afterward, they walked through the rain-slicked streets, talking about everything and nothing, and Quinlan realized with a start that she was happy. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this way, this light, this hopeful. When Silas walked her to the bus stop, he hesitated, then said, "I really like spending time with you, Quinlan." I hope that's not weird to say. Quinlan felt warmth spread through her chest. "It's not weird," she said softly. "I like spending time with you too." The problem was that happiness at Roosevelt Preparatory didn't go unnoticed, especially not happiness that involved someone Trent Castellano had marked as his target. On Monday morning, Quinlan was at her locker when Trent materialized beside her, Marcus and Ashton flanking him. Well, Trent said loudly enough to draw attention from passing students. "Looks like the charity case found a boyfriend. Tell me, Silas, does she put out, or is she as boring as she looks?" Quinlan's hands froze on her locker door. Beside her, she heard Silas's sharp intake of breath. Before either of them could respond, Trent continued, "Actually, don't answer that. I don't want to picture either of you naked. It'd probably put me off lunch." Marcus and Ashton laughed dutifully. A crowd was forming because crowds always formed around Trent, drawn to cruelty like moths to flame. Quinlan forced herself to meet Trent's eyes. "Leave us alone," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Trent's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Oh, she speaks, and she makes demands. That's adorable." He turned to Silas. "You know she's a complete loser, right? Or are you a loser too, and this is like a loser support group situation?" Silas stepped forward, and Quinlan's heart lurched. She could see the anger in his posture, the way his hands had curled into fists. "Back off, Castellano," Silas said, his voice tight. Trent laughed, a sound without humor. "Or what? You'll bore me to death with poetry. Face it, Ortega, you and your little girlfriend are at the bottom of the food chain here, and that's where you're going to stay." He reached out and shoved Silas's shoulder. Not hard, just enough to be dismissive. Quinlan felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been holding firm for weeks. Her body tensed, her weight shifting automatically to the balls of her feet, her hands opening from fists into the loose, ready position her instructors had drilled into her for years. For one crystalline moment, she was on the edge of action, her body screaming at her to move, to intercept, to neutralize the threat. Then she saw Silas's expression, surprised but not afraid, angry but not violent, and she forced herself to remain still. This wasn't her fight. She had made a promise. Silas recovered his balance and pulled Quinlan's arm gently. "Come on," he said quietly. "They're not worth it." They walked away while Trent's laughter followed them down the hallway. That afternoon, Quinlan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was a photo from Saturday, her and Silas leaving the bookstore, heads close together, with a caption, "Loser Love Story." Within an hour, the photo had been shared across Instagram, Snapchat, and the main Roosevelt group chat. The comments were vicious, desperate, pathetic. At least they found each other. Bottom of the barrel. Quinlan's hands shook as she scrolled through the posts. She wanted to throw her phone across the room. She wanted to hunt down Trent and show him exactly what happened when you push someone trained in combat beyond their limits. Instead, she turned off her phone and lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, reciting the promise she had made to her grandmother like a mantra. That night, Silas called. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "This is my fault. If I hadn't invited you out..." Quinlan interrupted him. Don't! Don't apologize for being nice to me. That's exactly what they want." There was a pause, then Silas said quietly, "We could ignore them, pretend they don't exist." Quinlan closed her eyes. "That's what I've been doing. It doesn't work." The 8th week was brutal. Trent had found a new angle of attack, and he pursued it with the focused cruelty of someone who understood psychological warfare. He didn't target Quinlan alone anymore. He made sure to humiliate Silas too. In the cafeteria, he would loudly narrate an imaginary romance between them, complete with obscene commentary that made students laugh and Silas's face turn red. In the hallways, he would make kissing noises whenever they were near. During gym class, Quinlan's least favorite period because it meant changing in the locker room where privacy was impossible, Ashton Pierce threw Quinlan's clothes into the shower, soaking them. When Quinlan reported it to Coach Williams, the coach sighed and said, "Just wring them out, Thorne. You'll survive." Quinlan had to wear damp jeans for the rest of the day, the fabric clinging to her legs, feeling every eye on her and hearing every whisper. Silas began eating lunch with her in the library, which Quinlan appreciated and hated in equal measure. She appreciated his loyalty, his refusal to distance himself despite the social cost. She hated that he was suffering because of her. "You should stop sitting with me," she told him one day. Silas looked at her like she'd suggested he set himself on fire. "Are you kidding? You're the only person in this school I actually want to talk to." Quinlan tried again. "They're making your life miserable because of me." Silas shook his head firmly. "They're making my life miserable because they're bullies. That's not on you." He reached across the table and touched her hand briefly. "I'm not going anywhere, Quinlan. Get used to it." The warmth of that simple touch stayed with Quinlan for hours afterward, a small point of light in the gathering darkness. By the 9th week, Quinlan was barely sleeping. She would lie awake replaying the day's humiliations, her mind offering detailed scenarios of how she could have responded differently. In these fantasies, she didn't make herself small. She stood tall. When Trent shoved Silas, she intercepted with a simple wrist control that redirected his energy and left him stumbling. When Marcus threw her belongings, she caught his wrist mid-throw and applied just enough pressure to make him drop everything and back away. When Ashton made crude comments, she met his eyes with a stare that communicated exactly how quickly she could dismantle him if she chose. These fantasies were vivid and satisfying and completely counter to everything she had promised. She would wake from them feeling guilty and frustrated, her body aching with the need for action. During this time, small details began slipping through her carefully maintained facade. One morning, a student bumped into her in the hallway, and Quinlan's hand shot out reflexively, catching the student's arm to steady them both. The movement was too fast, too controlled, and the student stared at Quinlan with confusion. "Nice reflexes," they muttered before walking away. Another day, Quinlan dropped her pencil during class and caught it mid-air without looking, her hand moving with the kind of precision that came from years of training in hand-eye coordination. Mrs. Henderson, who witnessed it, paused in her lecture and gave Quinlan a long, assessing look. In gym class, during a dodgeball game Quinlan usually avoided, she was cornered by 3 balls thrown simultaneously. Without thinking, she slipped between them, a shoulder roll that transitioned into a recovery step, and all 3 balls sailed past her. The gym fell silent for a beat, and Quinlan realized her mistake immediately. She deliberately missed the next throw and got herself out, but the damage was done. Students were starting to notice that the quiet new girl moved differently when she wasn't paying attention. The breaking point approached during the 10th week. Trent and his friends had escalated to physical intimidation. They would crowd Quinlan in hallways, forcing her to squeeze past them or wait until they moved. They would accidentally elbow her, step on her heels, slam locker doors near her face. The constant threat of physical contact kept Quinlan's adrenaline permanently elevated, her nervous system locked in fight or flight mode. Silas noticed the change in her. "You seem different lately," he said one day at lunch. "More tense." Quinlan tried to smile. "Just tired." Silas didn't look convinced. "Are you sleeping okay?" The concern in his voice made Quinlan's throat tighten. She wanted to tell him everything, about her training, her promise, the war she was fighting against herself every single day. Instead, she said, "Some nights are harder than others." Silas nodded slowly. "If you ever want to talk about anything, I'm here. No judgment, no pressure, just here." Quinlan found herself blinking back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. That Friday afternoon, something shifted. Quinlan was walking to her locker when she heard raised voices from around the corner. She recognized one of them immediately, Silas. She turned the corner to find him confronting Trent in the middle of the hallway, students forming a circle around them. "I'm done being polite," Silas was saying, his face flushed. "You're a coward and a bully, and everyone knows it." Trent's expression was amused rather than angry. "Everyone knows it, really? Because from where I'm standing, everyone's watching you make an idiot of yourself." Marcus and Ashton moved closer to Silas, hemming him in. Quinlan's vision narrowed. She saw the positioning, 3 against 1, Silas outnumbered and outmatched physically, Trent's body language indicating he was about to escalate from verbal to physical. She saw the crowd of students watching, with the same detached interest they had shown during every previous incident, their phones out and recording, but no one intervening. She saw the choice before her like a crossroads, walk away and maintain her promise or step in and break it. Before she could decide, Trent shoved Silas hard enough to send him stumbling backward. Quinlan moved without conscious thought. She covered the distance in 3 strides and caught Silas before he could hit the lockers, her body absorbing and redirecting his momentum so smoothly that he barely felt the impact. She positioned herself between Silas and Trent, her stance neutral but balanced, her eyes locked on Trent's face. "That's enough," she said quietly. The hallway went silent. Trent stared at Quinlan like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Then his face split into a delighted grin. "Oh, this is precious. The girlfriend coming to rescue her boyfriend. What are you going to do, Thorn? Bore me to death with your sad eyes?" He took a step closer, invading her space in a way he had done dozens of times before. This time, Quinlan didn't back away. She held her ground, her body language subtly shifting in ways only someone with training would recognize. Weight-centered, knees slightly bent, hands relaxed but ready. Trent noticed something was different. His grin faltered slightly. "What, you're going to fight me now?" "That's hilarious." Quinlan felt Silas's hand on her shoulder. "Quinlan, don't. He's not worth it." The concern in his voice, the fear not for himself but for her, crystallized her decision. She stepped back, forcing her body to relax, and guided Silas away from the confrontation. Behind them, Trent's laughter followed. "Yeah, that's what I thought. Run away, just like you always do." The crowd dispersed, disappointed by the lack of violence. Quinlan and Silas walked in silence until they reached the front entrance of the school. Outside, Silas turned to her, his expression troubled. "You could have taken him, couldn't you?" The question hung in the air. Quinlan opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. She was tired of lying. "Yes," she said simply. Silas absorbed this. "You have some kind of training." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why don't you use it?" Quinlan looked away, watching cars pass on the street beyond the school parking lot. "I made a promise to someone important that I wouldn't use violence except to protect, not to punish, not to prove a point, only to protect." Silas considered this for a long moment. But what if protecting yourself or someone you care about requires meeting violence with violence? What if the only way to stop them is to show them you can't be pushed around? Quinlan had asked herself the same questions 1,000 times. Then I break my promise and become someone I don't want to be. Silas shook his head. That's not how it works. Defending yourself doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who refuses to be a victim. They stood in the cooling afternoon air, the weight of the conversation settling around them. Finally, Silas said, "For what it's worth, I respect what you're trying to do, but I also think there's a difference between being violent and being strong. You're already strong, Quinlan. You've been strong this whole time, but maybe it's okay to show people that strength." His words stayed with Quinlan through the weekend, circling her thoughts like birds refusing to land. That night, alone in her room, Quinlan did something she hadn't done since arriving at Roosevelt. She moved her furniture to create an open space, changed into comfortable clothes, and ran through her forms. She started with basics, the foundational movements of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that had been drilled into her until they became muscle memory. She practiced her guard pulls, her hip escapes, her technical stand-ups. She moved through combinations, feeling her body remember what her mind had been trying to forget. Her muscles sang with recognition. Her breath fell into the familiar rhythm of exertion and control. She practiced takedowns on an invisible opponent, feeling the precise moment when leverage overcame strength, when technique rendered size irrelevant. She drilled submissions, arm bars, triangles, rear naked chokes, stopping at the point where she would normally tap, releasing phantom partners with care. For 40 minutes, she was not Quinlan the victim, not Quinlan the target. She was simply Quinlan the practitioner, skilled and confident and whole. When she finished, she was sweating and centered in a way she hadn't felt in months. She sat on her bedroom floor, her back against the wall, and allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She missed this. She missed the feeling of competence, the knowledge that she could handle herself, the confidence that came from years of disciplined practice. She had given it up to honor her grandmother's wish. But in doing so, she had given up part of herself. Her grandmother had wanted her to be strong without being cruel, capable without being violent. But maybe Silas was right. Maybe showing strength wasn't the same as being violent. Maybe there was a way to honor her promise while also honoring herself. The 11th week began with a shift in Quinlan that students noticed immediately. She walked into school Monday morning with her shoulders back, her head up, her stride confident. She made eye contact. She claimed space instead of shrinking from it. The change wasn't dramatic enough to be a complete transformation, but it was visible enough that several students did double takes when she passed. In first period, when Trent made a snide comment about her appearance, Quinlan turned and looked at him directly. She didn't respond, didn't react, just held his gaze until he looked away first, confused by her lack of submission. At lunch, she and Silas sat at an actual cafeteria table instead of hiding in the library. Students stared, whispered, but no one approached. Trent and his friends sat at their usual table across the cafeteria, and Quinlan felt Trent's eyes on her multiple times throughout the period. She didn't look away when their eyes met. She was done being afraid. Trent noticed the change, and it bothered him. His social power was predicated on fear and submission, and Quinlan's refusal to provide either was a direct challenge to his authority. By Wednesday, he had started planning something bigger. Quinlan saw the signs, the whispered conversations with Marcus and Ashton, the speculative glances in her direction, the increased boldness of their harassment. They were building toward something. That evening, Silas texted her. "They're planning something for the dance on Friday. I heard Marcus talking about it." Roosevelt's autumn formal was a tradition Quinlan had planned to skip, but Silas's warning made her reconsider. Running from confrontation hadn't worked. Maybe it was time to stop running. Thursday afternoon, Quinlan stayed late in the computer lab, ostensibly working on an assignment, but actually steeling herself for what she knew was coming. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Working late shift, dinner in fridge, love you." Quinlan replied with a heart emoji and returned to staring at the computer screen. She was tired, bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the constant vigilance required to survive Roosevelt Preparatory. She thought about her grandmother, about the promise she had made, about the girl she used to be who walked through the world without fear. She thought about Silas, who had chosen to be her friend despite the social cost. She thought about every student who had watched her be humiliated and done nothing, every teacher who had looked away, every administrator who had prioritized reputation over protection. She thought about Trent Castellano, whose entire sense of self was built on making others feel small, and she made her decision. Friday arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm temperatures. The autumn formal was scheduled for that evening, starting at 7 in the gymnasium. The school was decorated with banners and streamers, and there was an excited energy in the air that Quinlan found both alien and oddly comforting. Normal students excited about a normal dance. She wondered what that felt like. Silas found her after last period. "You're still planning to go?" he asked. Quinlan nodded. "Are you?" Silas shifted his weight, suddenly looking nervous. "I was thinking, would you want to go together? Like, as dates?" Quinlan felt warmth spread through her chest, despite the anxiety knotting her stomach. "I'd like that," she said softly. Silas's smile could have lit the entire school. "Yeah? Okay, good. Great. I'll pick you up at 6:30? "It's a date," Quinlan confirmed, and for a moment the approaching confrontation didn't matter. Quinlan went home and showered, then stood in front of her closet trying to decide what to wear. She didn't have much. Her wardrobe was practical rather than fashionable, budget-conscious rather than stylish. She finally selected a simple dress she had worn to her grandmother's funeral. Dark blue and modest, paired with flats because she couldn't walk in heels and she wanted to be able to move if necessary. She left her hair down, applied minimal makeup, and examined herself in the mirror. She looked like herself, plain, quiet, unremarkable. But her eyes were different. There was something in them that hadn't been there before, something hard and determined. She thought again of her grandmother and whispered, "I'm sorry if this isn't what you wanted. But I can't keep being a victim." The words felt both like a betrayal and a release. Silas arrived exactly at 6:30, wearing a button-down shirt and slacks, his hair carefully styled. "You look beautiful," he said when Quinlan opened the door, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied. They took the bus to school, the tension between them palpable but not unpleasant. Silas held her hand as they walked into the gymnasium, and Quinlan felt simultaneously exposed and protected by the gesture. The gymnasium was transformed with lighting and decorations, the basketball hoops covered with fabric, tables arranged around a makeshift dance floor. Students clustered in groups, some dancing, others standing around talking and laughing. Quinlan spotted Trent immediately. He was impossible to miss, holding court near the refreshment table, surrounded by his usual crowd. For 30 minutes, everything was fine. Quinlan and Silas danced to several songs, their movements awkward but genuine. They got punch from the refreshment table, found seats at an empty table, talked about nothing important. Quinlan almost let herself believe the night would pass without incident. Then Trent approached their table, Marcus and Ashton flanking him as always, and she knew that belief had been naive. "Well, well," Trent said, his voice cutting through the music, "the happy couple. This is touching, really. I didn't think either of you had the balls to show up here." Several nearby students turned to watch. Phones emerged from pockets. Quinlan felt Silas tense beside her. "Leave us alone, Castellano," Silas said, his voice tight. Trent laughed. "Or what? You'll write angry poetry about me?" He turned his attention to Quinlan. "I have to admit, Thorne, I'm impressed. You actually found someone desperate enough to date you. That takes real bottom-of-the-barrel scraping." Quinlan stood slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. She met Trent's eyes, and for the first time since arriving at Roosevelt, she didn't look away. "We're not doing this anymore," she said clearly, loud enough for surrounding students to hear. "Your bullying stops tonight." The gymnasium had grown quiet. Students sensing something significant was about to happen. Trent's expression shifted from amused to genuinely surprised. "My bullying stops? Who exactly is going to stop me? You?" He stepped closer, invading her space in his characteristic intimidation move. Quinlan held her ground. "Yes," she said simply. "Me?" Trent's face darkened. Whatever he saw in Quinlan's expression, it wasn't submission, and it clearly angered him. "You think you're tough now? You think because you have a boyfriend, you're somebody?" He reached out and grabbed her shoulder, his grip tight enough to hurt. Quinlan's body moved before her conscious mind could catch up, muscle memory overriding thought. Her hand came up and trapped Trent's hand against her shoulder, controlling his wrist. In the same motion, she stepped off the line of his force, creating an angle, and applied pressure to the back of his hand. Not hard, just enough to make holding on painful. Trent's grip released immediately, and he jerked his hand back, staring at her with genuine confusion. "What the—" he started. Quinlan didn't let him finish. "I said, your bullying stops tonight. Walk away, and we can both pretend this never happened." The gymnasium was utterly silent now, every eye fixed on them. Trent looked around, seeing the crowd, the phones recording, his reputation hanging in the balance, his face flushed with anger. "You must be out of your mind," he said, and then he shoved her. Hard. This was the moment. This was the choice her grandmother had warned her about, the line she had sworn not to cross. Quinlan felt the shove send her back a step, felt Trent moving forward to follow up with something worse, felt every eye watching and every phone recording. She felt her promise weighing on her like chains, and then she looked past Trent and saw Silas's face, worried, scared, supportive, and she felt something in her chest settle and harden. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She wasn't doing this to hurt Trent. She was doing this to protect herself, to protect Silas, to protect every other student Trent would victimize if she didn't stop him now. That made the difference. When Trent reached for her again, Quinlan was ready. She parried his hand with a simple deflection, stepped inside his guard, and executed a basic hip throw. Osotogari, one of the first throws taught in judo because of its effectiveness and safety. She controlled Trent's momentum, guided his fall, made sure he landed on the gymnasium floor without hitting his head or landing on his neck. It was textbook technique, performed with years of practice, and it was over in less than 2 seconds. Trent hit the ground with a thud that echoed through the silent gym, the air rushing out of his lungs in an audible gasp. Quinlan stepped back immediately, her hands up in a non-aggressive position, her breathing controlled. The gymnasium erupted in noise, gasps, shouts, exclamations of disbelief. Marcus and Ashton stood frozen for a moment, shock written across their faces. Then some instinct toward loyalty overcame their surprise, and they moved toward Quinlan. She saw them coming, assessed their positions, and felt a strange calm settle over her. This was what she had trained for. This was what her body had been screaming to do for months. Marcus reached her first, throwing a wild haymaker that telegraphed so clearly, Quinlan almost felt bad for him. She slipped the punch, a simple movement of her head off the center line, and as Marcus's momentum carried him past her, she applied a standing Kimura lock to his extended arm, controlling the shoulder and elbow. The pain was immediate, and Marcus dropped to his knees with a yelp. Quinlan released him instantly and moved on to Ashton, who had learned nothing from watching his friends fail. Ashton tried to grab her, reaching for her arms in what might have been an attempt at a clinch or restraint. Quinlan allowed the grip, then demonstrated why grappling with someone trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was a terrible idea. She established wrist control, broke his grip, and transitioned to a standing arm drag that pulled Ashton off balance. Before he could recover, she had him face down on the ground with a basic pin, her knee on his back, his arm controlled. She held him there for 3 seconds, long enough to make her point, then released him and stood up. The entire sequence had taken less than 30 seconds. 3 opponents, all significantly larger than her, all neutralized with minimal force and 0 injuries beyond bruised egos and minor joint pain. The gymnasium was pandemonium. Students were shouting, some cheering, others simply staring in disbelief. Phones were everywhere, capturing every angle. Teachers were pushing through the crowd, yelling for everyone to move back. Quinlan stood in the center of the chaos, breathing hard but controlled, her body still humming with adrenaline. Trent had gotten to his feet, his face red with humiliation and fury. He started toward her again, and Quinlan settled into a fighting stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight on the balls of her feet, hands up in a loose guard. The stance communicated everything Trent needed to know. She was trained, she was ready, and she would do this as many times as necessary. Trent stopped, his fists clenched, his chest heaving. For a long moment they stared at each other across the gymnasium floor. Then Principal Davidson arrived, flanked by 2 security guards and Coach Williams. "Everyone back!" Principal Davidson shouted. "Break it up! Now!" The crowd dispersed reluctantly, students still filming, still whispering. The principal looked at the scene. Trent standing in the middle of the floor, Marcus nursing his shoulder, Ashton getting slowly to his feet, and Quinlan standing perfectly still in her fighting stance. "Miss Thorne," the principal said carefully, "please lower your hands and come with me. Mr. Castellano, Mr. Webb, Mr. Pierce, you 3 as well." Quinlan forced her body to relax, her hands dropping to her sides. She looked around and found Silas at the edge of the crowd, his expression caught between amazement and concern. She gave him a small nod, trying to communicate that she was okay, that this had been necessary. Then she followed Principal Davidson out of the gymnasium and toward his office, leaving behind the ruins of Trent Castellano's social empire and the beginning of her own freedom. But the evening wasn't over. As they walked through the empty hallways toward the administrative offices, Trent's voice stopped them. "This isn't finished, Thorne." Quinlan turned to find Trent standing 20 feet behind them, having broken away from the group. His face was a mask of rage, his humiliation in front of the entire school clearly eating at him. Principal Davidson started to intervene, but Trent ignored him. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything?" His voice was rising, echoing off the lockers. "You're still nothing. You're still a nobody. And tomorrow everyone's going to remember that I'm Trent Castellano and you're just some freak who got lucky." Quinlan interrupted him, her voice calm and clear. "No, Trent. Tomorrow everyone's going to remember that you're the bully who got dropped by the quiet girl you spent weeks tormenting. They're going to remember that you needed 2 friends to back you up and you still lost. They're going to remember that when I had you on the ground, I could have really hurt you, and I chose not to. That's what they're going to remember." The truth of her words hit Trent visibly. His face went from red to pale. his body sagging as the full weight of his defeat registered. He had been exposed not just as a bully, but as a weak bully. Someone who picked on targets he thought couldn't fight back and fled when confronted with real opposition. Worse, he had been shown mercy, which was a form of domination more complete than violence could ever be. Everyone who had witnessed the confrontation would know that Quinlan could have hurt him badly and chose not to. That mercy would haunt him far longer than a beating would have. "This isn't over," Trent said again, but his voice was hollow now, lacking conviction. Quinlan shook her head. "Yes, it is, and you know it." Principal Davidson finally stepped between them. "That's enough. All of you, to my office. Now." The next hour was a blur of conversations, explanations, and phone calls. Principal Davidson listened to multiple accounts of what had happened, from Quinlan, from Trent, from Marcus and Ashton, from the teachers who had witnessed the confrontation. Students lined up outside his office, eager to provide their versions of events. Several had videos from different angles, which they played for the principal. The footage was damning for Trent. It clearly showed him initiating physical contact, shoving Quinlan first, then reaching for her again before she responded. It showed Marcus and Ashton intervening, two large male students moving to attack a much smaller female student, and it showed Quinlan's response, controlled, defensive, technically brilliant and notably restrained. At no point did she escalate beyond what was necessary to protect herself. At no point did she deliver unnecessary strikes or attempt to genuinely injure anyone. The principal watched the videos multiple times, his expression growing more troubled with each viewing. Finally, he called Quinlan's mother. It was nearly 11 o'clock when Mrs. Thorne arrived, still in her nursing scrubs, her face tight with worry. The principal explained the situation, showed her the videos, and waited for her reaction. Mrs. Thorne watched the footage in silence, then turned to Quinlan. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Quinlan shook her head. "No, Mom, I'm fine." Her mother's eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Your grandmother taught you well," she said softly. "She'd be proud that you only used it to defend yourself and that boy." Then she turned to Principal Davidson. "My daughter has been bullied since her first day here. I didn't know because she didn't tell me. She didn't want to worry me, but I can see it now in the videos. I can see weeks of harassment that apparently no one here thought worthy of intervention." Her voice was cold, professional, the voice of a nurse delivering bad news to a patient who wasn't going to like it. "So, before we discuss what consequences my daughter faces for defending herself, I'd like to discuss what consequences Mr. Castellano and his friends face for months of systematic harassment." Principal Davidson shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Thorne, I understand your concern, but we have to consider all perspectives here. Mr. Castellano claims he was just engaging in typical teenage behavior, that Miss Thorne overreacted. Typical teenage behavior." Mrs. Thorne's voice cut like a scalpel. "I watched a video where your student shoved my daughter hard enough to move her several feet. That's not teenage behavior. That's assault. And my daughter's response was textbook self-defense. If you can't see that, then I'll be happy to explain it to the school board, the local media, and an attorney." The threat hung in the air. Principal Davidson was clearly doing the calculation. Trent Castellanos' wealthy, connected father versus the mother of a student with clear video evidence of being assaulted. The math wasn't in his favor. "Let me be clear about our position," he said finally. "Based on the evidence, including multiple witness statements and video footage, Miss Thorne acted in self-defense after being physically assaulted. She will not face disciplinary action. However," he paused, looking at Quinlan, "however, I'm going to ask that you meet with our guidance counselor, Miss Rodriguez, starting Monday, not as punishment, but because I think it would be beneficial to talk with someone about what you've been experiencing." Mrs. Thorne nodded. "Acceptable. And Mr. Castellano?" The principal's jaw tightened. Mr. Castellano, Mr. Webb, and Mr. Pierce will all face suspension pending a full investigation into bullying complaints. If the investigation confirms systematic harassment, which the video evidence strongly suggests, they'll face additional consequences, including mandatory counseling and possible expulsion if their behavior doesn't improve. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Quinlan felt a weight lift from her chest that she hadn't realized was there. She wasn't being punished for defending herself. The school was finally acknowledging what had been happening. It was more than she had dared to hope for. They left the principal's office near midnight. In the parking lot, Silas was waiting, leaning against his parents' car. When he saw Quinlan, he straightened immediately. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he said. Mrs. Thorne looked between them, then smiled slightly. "I'll give you two a minute." She walked toward their car, leaving Quinlan and Silas alone under the parking lot lights. "That was incredible," Silas said quietly. "I've never seen anything like that. You were amazing." Quinlan shook her head. "It wasn't amazing, it was necessary." "Still," Silas insisted, "you stood up for yourself, for both of us. That took real courage." Quinlan met his eyes, seeing genuine admiration there, and felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I was afraid," she admitted. "The whole time, I was terrified." Silas stepped closer. "Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing the right thing anyway." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think your grandmother would be proud of you too." Now, the next few days were surreal. The videos from the dance went viral, not just at Roosevelt Preparatory, but across multiple social media platforms. Quinlan became an overnight sensation, the quiet girl who defended herself against bullies with martial arts skills no one knew she had. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Students from other schools shared their own bullying stories. Adults congratulated her on her restraint. A few martial arts instructors commented on her technique, impressed by her control and precision. The attention was overwhelming and uncomfortable, but it brought something Quinlan hadn't expected: accountability. The viral nature of the videos meant Roosevelt Preparatory couldn't sweep the incident under the rug. The school board launched an investigation. Local news stations requested interviews, which Quinlan declined. Parents called, demanding to know what measures the school was taking to prevent bullying. Under pressure from multiple directions, Roosevelt was forced to take action. Trent, Marcus, and Ashton were suspended for 2 weeks while the investigation proceeded. When they returned, it was with strict conditions: mandatory counseling, zero tolerance for any further harassment, and probationary status that meant one more incident would result in expulsion. The social fallout was even more severe. Their status at Roosevelt evaporated overnight. Students who had laughed at their cruel jokes now avoided them. The football team's season suffered, with Trent benched indefinitely. Marcus and Ashton's friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the humiliation. The videos had exposed them not just as bullies, but as weak bullies, and Roosevelt's social hierarchy had no mercy for weakness. They ate lunch alone, walked the hallways with their heads down, and experienced for the first time what they had inflicted on others for years. Quinlan, meanwhile, found herself in an uncomfortable position. She was suddenly popular in a way she had never sought and didn't particularly want. Students wanted to sit with her at lunch, walk with her between classes, be seen as her friend. Several asked if she could teach them self-defense. The wrestling coach, Coach Morrison, approached her about joining the wrestling team. "We could use someone with your skills, and it's one of the few sports where technique matters more than size." Quinlan politely declined most of these overtures. She appreciated the respect, but she didn't want her identity to be defined by one violent confrontation. She had spent months trying to be invisible, and becoming the center of attention felt almost as uncomfortable as being bullied had been. The one friendship she maintained and deepened was with Silas. They continued having lunch together, now at a regular cafeteria table without fear of harassment. They studied together at the library after school. They went to movies on weekends and spent hours talking about books, philosophy, and the strangeness of their sudden notoriety. Their relationship evolved naturally from friendship into something more, marked not by grand gestures but by small moments. Hands finding each other under the lunch table, goodnight texts that stretched past midnight, the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "I'm glad you're in my life," Silas told her one afternoon as they sat in his car after school. "Even with all the drama and attention, even with everything that happened, I'm glad." Quinlan smiled. "Me too," she said, and meant it. 3 weeks after the dance, Quinlan had her first scheduled meeting with Miss Rodriguez, the guidance counselor. She approached it with trepidation, expecting judgment or prying questions. Instead, she found a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a direct manner. "I'm not here to psychoanalyze you or make you relive trauma," Miss Rodriguez said immediately. "I'm here to provide support and help you process what you've experienced. Everything we discuss is confidential unless you're in danger, which I don't think is the case. So let's start simple. How are you doing?" The question was so straightforward that Quinlan felt something in her chest loosen. "Honestly, I'm not sure," she admitted. "Some days I feel great, like I finally took control of my life. Other days I feel guilty, like I broke a promise I should have kept. And some days I just feel tired." Miss Rodriguez nodded. "That's completely normal. You were in an impossible situation for months. Your nervous system was constantly activated, constantly preparing for threat. That takes a toll, and it doesn't just disappear because the threat is gone. You're going to have aftershocks, anxiety, hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts. That's your brain's way of processing trauma." They talked for the full hour, and Quinlan found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone, not even Silas or her mother. She talked about her grandmother, the promise she had made, the guilt she felt about breaking it. Miss Rodriguez listened without judgment, then offered a different perspective. "Your grandmother asked you not to use violence to punish, but what you did wasn't punishment, it was protection. You protected yourself and your friend from ongoing harm. That's not the same thing, and I think if your grandmother were here, she'd understand the difference." The words settled something in Quinlan that had been restless since the dance. Maybe she hadn't betrayed her promise after all. Maybe showing mercy to Trent was exactly what her grandmother had meant, using strength without cruelty, defending without dominating. As the weeks passed, Roosevelt Preparatory slowly found a new equilibrium. The investigation concluded with a scathing report on the school's failure to address bullying complaints, leading to new policies and mandatory training for staff. Several teachers who had witnessed harassment and done nothing were reprimanded. Principal Davidson implemented a zero-tolerance policy for bullying that actually seemed to have teeth, unlike the previous lip service. Students became more willing to report incidents, and more importantly, more willing to intervene when they witnessed harassment. The bystander effect that had allowed Trent to operate for so long began to crack. One afternoon in early December, Quinlan was walking through the hallway when she noticed a smaller student, a freshman by the look of him, being cornered by two older students near the lockers. The older students weren't touching the freshman, but their body language was clearly threatening, and the freshman looked terrified. Without thinking, Quinlan altered her course and walked directly to the group. "Is there a problem here?" she asked calmly, positioning herself between the freshman and the two older students. The older students recognized her immediately. Everyone at Roosevelt knew who she was now. They exchanged glances, and whatever they saw in Quinlan's expression made them decide against escalation. "No problem," one of them muttered. "Just talking." They walked away quickly, and Quinlan turned to the freshman. "You okay?" The freshman nodded, his face flushed. "Thank you," he said quietly. I didn't know what to do. Quinlan thought about all the times she had been in his position, frozen and helpless. If it happens again, report it. And if they don't listen, find me or one of the teachers who actually care. You don't have to handle this alone. The freshman's expression shifted from scared to hopeful, and Quinlan realized this was what her grandmother had meant about using strength to protect. It wasn't just about defending yourself in the moment, it was about creating a space where others felt safe too. The confrontation with Trent had ripple effects Quinlan hadn't anticipated. Other students who had been bullied began speaking up, emboldened by her example. A senior named Melissa reported systematic harassment by a group of girls in her class, and this time the school took immediate action. A junior named David told a teacher about homophobic slurs he endured daily, and the perpetrators faced real consequences. The culture at Roosevelt was shifting, slowly but visibly. It wasn't perfect, no school could eliminate cruelty entirely. But there was a growing sense that harassment would no longer be tolerated, that bystanders had a responsibility to act, that strength could be used for protection rather than domination. Quinlan had become, somewhat reluctantly, a symbol of that shift. As December turned toward January, Quinlan finally had a conversation she had been avoiding. She was leaving the library after school when she saw Trent sitting alone on a bench near the parking lot. He looked different, smaller somehow, his usual bravado stripped away. For a moment, Quinlan considered walking past without acknowledging him, but something made her pause. She thought about her grandmother, about mercy, about the possibility of change. She walked over and sat on the opposite end of the bench, leaving several feet of space between them. Trent looked up, startled, his body tensing as if preparing for an attack. "I'm not here to fight," Quinlan said quietly. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Trent spoke, his voice rough. "I've been wanting to apologize. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I wanted to say it anyway. What I did to you, what I did to a lot of people, was wrong. I was angry at my father, angry at my own life, and I took it out on people who didn't deserve it. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth." Quinlan absorbed this. She could hear the genuine remorse in his voice, see the change in his posture and demeanor. This wasn't the swaggering bully who had tormented her for months. This was someone who had been forced to confront the worst parts of themselves and was trying, however imperfectly, to be better. "Why were you angry?" she asked. Trent laughed bitterly. "My father has this vision of who I'm supposed to be, perfect grades, star athlete, future CEO. Anything less than perfection is failure in his eyes. I've spent my whole life trying to measure up and falling short. So I found people I could control, people I could dominate, to feel like I had power somewhere in my life. Pretty pathetic, right?" Quinlan thought about her own journey, her own struggles with anger and control. Not pathetic, human, but being hurt doesn't give you permission to hurt others. You know that now. "Yeah," Trent said softly. "I know that now. For what it's worth, I'm in therapy, court-mandated, but I think it's actually helping. I'm learning about my triggers, my patterns, how to handle frustration without taking it out on people. It's hard work." "Good," Quinlan said. She meant it. Trent turned to look at her directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I'm not sure I ever will. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, and I wanted to thank you." Quinlan raised an eyebrow. "Thank me?" Trent nodded. "You could have really hurt me that night. You had me on the ground and I saw it in your eyes. You knew exactly how to put me in the hospital if you wanted to, but you didn't. You showed me mercy when I absolutely didn't deserve it. That's been harder to live with than any beating would have been, but it's also been more instructive. You taught me that strength isn't about domination. I'm still processing what it is about, but I know it's not that." They sat together for a few more minutes. Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Then Quinlan stood. "I hope you figure it out, Trent. I really do. But we're not friends, and we're not going to be. The best thing you can do for me is leave me alone and never treat anyone else the way you treated me." Trent nodded. "I can do that." As Quinlan walked toward the parking lot where Silas was waiting for her, she felt a sense of completion. This wasn't a Hollywood ending where former enemies became best friends. It was something more realistic and perhaps more meaningful: mutual acknowledgement, genuine remorse, and the beginning of separate paths toward becoming better people. The rest of the school year passed with surprising normalcy. Quinlan's notoriety faded as new dramas captured Roosevelt's attention. She settled into a comfortable routine: classes, lunch with Silas, sessions with Miss Rodriguez every 2 weeks, occasional self-defense practice at home to maintain her skills. She joined the school's book club at Silas's suggestion and found a small community of readers who cared more about literature than social hierarchy. She maintained friendly but distant relationships with the students who had supported her after the confrontation, not wanting to become defined by that single event. She was just Quinlan again, quiet but no longer invisible, confident but not aggressive, present in her own life in a way she hadn't been before. In April, the wrestling coach approached her again. "I know you turned me down before," Coach Morrison said, "but I wanted to try one more time. I'm not asking you to compete. I'm asking if you'd be willing to teach some defensive techniques to the team. A lot of them could benefit from understanding positional control and leverage the way you do. It'd be once a week after practice, totally optional for you." Quinlan considered it. She had spent so long hiding her skills that the idea of openly sharing them felt strange. But she thought about the freshmen she had helped, about the culture shift at Roosevelt, about the ways strength could be used to help rather than hurt. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll try it." Teaching the wrestling team became one of the most rewarding experiences of Quinlan's time at Roosevelt. She demonstrated basic Brazilian jiu-jitsu positions: how to maintain mount, how to escape side control, how to use leverage instead of strength. The wrestlers were enthusiastic students, and several told her that understanding grappling from a different perspective improved their competitive performance. More importantly, she felt like she was contributing something positive, turning her skills into something constructive rather than reactive. Graduation approached faster than Quinlan expected. She and Silas had both been accepted to colleges, different schools, but only 2 hours apart, close enough for weekend visits. Their relationship had deepened into something solid and lasting, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than drama or intensity. They studied together for finals, helped each other with college preparations, and made plans for staying connected despite the distance. "I'm going to miss seeing you every day," Silas told her one afternoon as they sat in his car after their last day of classes. "But I'm also excited to see who we both become in college. We're going to be okay." Quinlan leaned her head on his shoulder. "Yeah," she said, "we're going to be okay." The graduation ceremony was held on Roosevelt's football field under a clear June sky. Quinlan sat with her class, listening to speeches about potential and futures, looking around at the faces she had come to know over the past year. She saw Trent sitting several rows ahead, his posture still different from the swaggering confidence he had displayed when she first met him. She saw Marcus and Ashton sitting separately, their friendship apparently fractured under the weight of their shared humiliation. She saw students she had helped, students who had helped her, students she had never spoken to but who had witnessed her transformation. She saw her mother in the audience, beaming with pride, and felt gratitude for the support that had carried her through the hardest months. When they called her name and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the applause was genuine and warm. She wasn't the valedictorian or the most popular student or the class president. She was just Quinlan Thorne, who had survived Roosevelt Preparatory and emerged on the other side stronger, wiser, and more herself than she had been when she arrived. That felt like enough. That felt like victory. After the ceremony, Quinlan found a quiet spot near the football field's fence while families celebrated around her. Silas found her there a few minutes later. "You okay?" he asked. Quinlan nodded. "Just thinking, a year ago I was terrified of this place. I spent every day trying to disappear, trying to survive. And now," she gestured to the celebrating crowd, to the school that had been her prison and her proving ground. "Now I'm leaving, and it feels strange, like I'm leaving behind a version of myself." Silas took her hand. "The best version of yourself is coming with you. The version that knows she can defend herself but chooses not to. The version that showed mercy when she could have chosen revenge. That person is pretty remarkable." Quinlan thought about her grandmother, about the promise she had struggled with for so long. She had broken the letter of that promise, using her skills in a way her grandmother might not have approved of. But she had kept the spirit of it. She had protected without punishing, defended without dominating, shown strength without cruelty. She had learned that mercy was more powerful than violence, that standing up for yourself didn't require losing your humanity. That true strength included knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Those lessons felt more valuable than any diploma. As the sun set over Roosevelt Preparatory, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Quinlan made a decision. She would carry her skills and her experiences forward, but she would never again hide who she was. She would walk through the world with confidence, with awareness, with the knowledge that she could handle whatever came her way, but she would also walk with compassion, remembering what it felt like to be powerless and using that memory to guide her actions. She would be strong without being cruel, capable without being violent, confident without being arrogant. She would be exactly who her grandmother had hoped she would become, even if the path to becoming that person had been more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Months later, during her first semester of college, Quinlan would think back on that night at the dance and realize something important. The moment she chose to stand up for herself wasn't the moment she threw Trent to the ground. It was the moment she decided to attend the dance at all, knowing confrontation was inevitable. It was every day she had endured harassment without becoming bitter or cruel. It was choosing mercy when revenge would have been easier. The physical confrontation was just the visible manifestation of months of internal strength. True courage, she understood now, wasn't about winning fights. It was about maintaining your humanity in circumstances designed to strip it away, about choosing who you wanted to be, even when being that person was difficult. She shared this realization with Silas during one of their weekend visits, and he smiled in that way he had that suggested he had known all along. "That's why what you did mattered so much to everyone who saw it," he said. "It wasn't just that you defended yourself physically, it was that you defended who you were as a person. You didn't let them turn you into something you weren't. You stayed yourself, and that self turned out to be strong enough to handle anything they threw at you." They were walking through Silas's campus, autumn leaves crunching under their feet, and Quinlan felt a profound sense of peace. She had survived Roosevelt Preparatory. She had faced her fears and her demons. She had honored her grandmother's memory in the way that mattered most, not by avoiding all violence, but by ensuring that when she did use her skills, she used them with restraint and purpose. She had become someone her grandmother would be proud of, someone she herself was proud of. Years would pass. Quinlan would graduate college, pursue a career that fulfilled her, maintain her relationship with Silas through changes and challenges. She would continue training, not because she expected to need to defend herself again, but because the discipline and focus grounded her. She would occasionally hear about former Roosevelt students, Trent had apparently turned his life around, becoming an anti-bullying advocate and speaking at schools about his experiences. Marcus had joined the military and found structure that suited him. Ashton had simply disappeared from social media, pursuing whatever path he had chosen. She wished them well from a distance, hoping they had found their own versions of redemption. But on difficult days, when self-doubt crept in or challenges seemed insurmountable, Quinlan would think back to that night in the gymnasium. She would remember standing in the center of a hostile crowd, facing down her tormentors, making the choice to defend herself, despite every instinct telling her to remain passive. She would remember the feeling of her body responding with years of training, efficient and controlled. She would remember the moment she chose mercy over revenge, stepping back when she could have finished what Trent started, and she would remember walking out of that gymnasium with her head high, no longer a victim, no longer invisible, finally and completely herself. That night had taught her something fundamental about human nature. Everyone has the capacity for both cruelty and compassion, weakness and strength, violence and mercy. The difference between people isn't whether they possess these capacities. Everyone does. The difference is which capacity they choose to cultivate, which impulses they act on, which version of themselves they decide to be. Trent had chosen cruelty until the consequences forced him to reconsider. Quinlan had chosen restraint until self-preservation required action. The bystanders had chosen silence until someone's courage made them ashamed of their inaction. All of those choices mattered. All of those choices had consequences that rippled outward, affecting not just the individuals involved, but the entire community around them. In the end, Quinlan's story wasn't really about martial arts or bullying or even standing up for yourself, though it included all those elements. It was about the complicated journey of maintaining your humanity in a world that constantly tests it. It was about understanding that strength and compassion aren't opposing forces, but complementary ones. It was about learning that true victory isn't about dominating others, but about refusing to be dominated. Not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally. It was about the difference between being a victim and being victimized. One is an identity, the other is an experience, and only you can decide which one defines you. The dress she wore that night, the simple blue dress that had seemed so inadequate when she put it on, still hung in her closet years later. A reminder of the girl who walked into that gymnasium, not knowing if she had the courage to do what needed to be done. The juice stain never quite came out, a permanent mark from the moment before everything changed. Sometimes she would look at that dress and marvel at how young she had been, how uncertain, how close she came to remaining silent and small forever. And she would feel grateful to that younger version of herself for finding strength she didn't know she possessed, for honoring a promise even while breaking it, for showing the world and herself that quiet people can be strong, that mercy is a form of power, that choosing who you want to be is the most important choice anyone makes. Roosevelt Preparatory was just one school, 1 year, one chapter in a much longer story. But it was the chapter where Quinlan learned who she was and who she wanted to be. It was where she discovered that strength without compassion is just brutality, and compassion without strength is just weakness. But together, they create something powerful and rare. The ability to protect without destroying, to defend without becoming what you fight against, to stand firm while remaining human. Those lessons would serve her well in all the years to come, in all the challenges she would face, in all the moments when she would need to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. And in those moments, she would think of her grandmother's words, of Silas's support, of that night in the gymnasium when she chose herself and her humanity over fear and revenge. She would remember that true strength lies not in the capacity to hurt others, but in the choice not to, not in dominance, but in dignity, not in power, but in principle. Those memories would guide her forward, a compass pointing always toward the person she had fought so hard to become and the person she would continue to be for the rest of her life.